Thank you very much, and I'd like to welcome all our attendees to this session. I will be discussing how we can make our auditing work persist more over time. And I see this approach as like helping a child build a tower. We can either choose to be there all the time. It's going to topple to the right, we catch it, we put a couple of building blocks, we fix the immediate problem, then it's going to topple to the left, we catch it again, and we're always there. Or else we can choose to teach the child how to build the tower on her own. We can teach her how to choose the right building blocks. We can teach her how to start off from a wider base. And patience. Parents will know patience is important. But that way, the child can then build all the towers she wants, and we can then step back and watch with satisfaction all our work. As they say, it's not what we do for our children, but what we teach our children to do for their own. And I think this also applies to auditing. It's not what missing control can we find for the organization. It's not what failing control can we fix or make a recommendation to fix, but what recommendations can we make to help the organization improve, so that then as auditors, we step back and watch the organization work on its own. And there are several reasons why we should be doing this. Of course, the major reason is the increased pressures nowadays to deliver, not just auditors, be it managers, C-level personnel. We all have, the landscape has changed a lot in the past years, and we all have our pressures to deliver. There's competition, the business environment is changing, the rhythm of new technologies and emerging technologies. Even if it's not changing, auditors will need to take care of business continuity, project management, cybersecurity, cloud, Internet of Things, machine learning for cybersecurity, machine learning for fraud detection. The list just goes on and on and on. And I haven't mentioned regulations yet. Regulations bring two cards to this game. The first card is we need to add them to that list. The second card is that some regulations specifically mention that our auditing work needs to persist more over time. For example, there are EBA guidelines on ICT and risk management that contain such as ongoing basis or maintain updated. So if we're auditing against that, it is not enough to check, for example, that an inventory of assets is there. But we need, as auditors, we need to ensure that the organization has the capabilities to maintain that inventory of asset updated over time. If it's a pen test, same thing. It's not enough to say, we did a pen test 6 months ago. As auditors, we need to ensure that the organization can carry out subsequent pen tests over time. Another directive is the NIS directive. The part I'm going to talk about specifically targets auditing. The NIS directive requires or gives powers to the regulator to ask for a security audit to confirm that information security policies have been properly implemented and are being followed within the organization. And we cannot, of course, provide an audit that's 5 years old. So again, if I'm looking at the workings of an IT auditing team, I will not just be satisfied if they say, we did a security audit 6 months ago. I will want to ensure that they can keep doing security audits on an ongoing basis. And this is how we will ensure that we can push ourselves to maintain our effort, make our efforts persist more over time, so that we can satisfy all these requirements. We'll be using the COBIT enablers, now they are called components in COBIT 2019, control frameworks, and process maturity models. Let me start a little bit with some introductions. I am the kind of guy who likes to figure things out. And this has pushed me to approach IT audit from the technology portal. Sometimes we have auditors or financial auditors who become IT auditors. I was the IT guy sitting behind a computer screen, and I became eventually an IT auditor. And spending most of my time behind the computer screen, I was actually surprised when I delivered a course earlier this year and someone said, "Mark makes IT audit sound semi-cool." All right. And I said, I'll use this for introductions now. But much more interesting than my history, because 25 years of experience do feel like history now. Much more interesting than my history is the history of the Maltese Islands. And there on the left, you can see on the Maltese Islands, we have prehistoric temples that are the oldest freestanding structures of the world. They are 5,000 years old, older than the pyramids and even older than Stonehenge. And also on the Maltese Islands, on the right, some of you might have noticed, yes, there are some people who keep their key in their door. There are some villages, not the cities, of course, where people think it's safe to keep the key in the door. I will feel uncomfortable doing that, and probably most of you will feel uncomfortable as well. And I think these different perceptions towards risk, me feeling uncomfortable, but the owner of that house not feeling uncomfortable, keeping the key in the door, is the result of our experiences, our backgrounds. And there are a number of factors, and there were studies actually in this specific area, where there were a number of influencing factors that changed the way that we look towards the same risk. One person might perceive that risk to be high, another person might perceive that same risk to be low. Let me explain a little bit. One factor, for example, is whether a person is in control or not in control. And this is best demonstrated by a passenger riding on a car. Perhaps the driver is zapping down a narrow street a little bit too fast, and the passenger is pressing hard on the invisible brake pedal. They are in the same car, at the same speed, traveling down the same street, the same risks. But the passenger, because he's not in control, will perceive that risk to be higher. The driver will perceive the same risk to be lower. And there are other factors that change our perceptions towards risk. For example, another factor is whether a risk has materialized into an incident recently. If something happened to us, a cyber incident, or we lost our keys. If we lost our keys yesterday, today we're going to be extra careful and we make a mental note where we put our keys. Days turn into weeks, and we start going back to old habits, subconsciously throwing our keys the very first place that comes along. Because if it happened recently, we perceive that to be a higher risk. As if it happened long ago, or maybe we've all heard this, it's never happened to us. We perceive that to be a lower risk. It's human nature. A third and final example I will want to mention is when a risk materializes into an incident close to us, maybe to ourselves, to a relative of ours, to a neighbor of ours. We perceive that risk to be higher. Whereas if it happened on the other end of the world, we perceive the same risk to be much, much lower. And these factors push us to address what I call the immediate risks. However, as auditors, to make our work and our efforts persist more over time, we need to resist the urge to go for the immediate risk. We need to resist that and move towards enhancing organizational capabilities to build and maintain controls. not just fixing the immediate missing control, we fix that. We need to step back and look at how the organization is capable on its own to maintain controls. And I will explain this a little bit better through this diagram. If you look at the diagram here, the influencing factors that I was mentioning, being in control, a risk materialized recently or close to us, these will push us downwards in the diagram. They will push us to address the immediate risk, which manifests itself, for example, in a control that's not working, a failing control or a missing control. We have it right here, right now, under our responsibility. It happens to us, to our organization, and we feel, we missed this one, we're not in control, so we need to fix it. That's our reaction, our instincts. They will push us to fix that control. Or perhaps even to fix the control activity. Let me explain a little bit what controls and control activities are, just to make sure that we are all using the same terminology here. A control is something that is done by management to help them reduce the risks that can hinder them from reaching their objectives. They can be application controls or generic controls, or for example, an application control will be a limit. I am not allowed, for example, to spend more than 200 euro when using mobile payments in a day. And that is a control. It limits my ability and reduces the risks over there. Or it can be a process or a policy that applies throughout the whole organization. That's another kind of control. These will help us better, will help management monitor and direct an activity. Control activities are the distinct product created by the controls in place. For example, if a control is to require a signature, then the signature is the control activity. Or it could be dual signature, or perhaps encryption. The control is to have encryption. The encrypted stream of data will be that activity. And these influencing factors push us to address controls and perhaps even fix the control activities. If I have a missing signature, that will be my first reaction, get that missing signature or fix the missing control, which is very short-lived. Especially getting the signature is really, really short-lived because it's going to happen again in the future, definitely. Now, if we resist that temptation, that instinct to go for and fix the immediate risk, we need to move upwards in the diagram and we start looking how we can make our recommendations and even perhaps plan our audit work so that we can target more the organizational capability to maintain, to build and maintain goals. Like we're letting the child now build the tower on her own. That's how we need to approach this. And we approach this by looking at these components. We have the Audit components, we have control frameworks, we have process maturity models, and in some cases, using the work of other experts, which is in Azaka standard, and it's also incorporated in Audit components when we discuss skills and people. Very briefly, the components are something required to make something work. There are policies, processes, skills, organizational structures. I remember once we had an issue where we had an immediate risk and there was resistance to GDPR considerations in an organization. We could simply have recommended, while doing this audit, please include GDPR considerations within and embed them within other organizational processes. But that would be very short-lived. The root cause of the problem was to fix the organizational structure and give a stronger voice to the DPO so that he can then carry on forward, even if in the future he encounters other problems with embedding GDPR considerations within the organization. He would be able then, giving him a stronger voice, we changed the organizational structure so that he reported higher up within the hierarchy of the organization. we gave him a stronger voice to better influence the organization. And that was very much long-lived than our first instinct and reaction to support and embed GDPR considerations in other processes. ISACA, as a side note, ISACA has publications on these audit programs and assurance programs, how you can approach this by following these programs. And it's worth taking a look because they will help you cover a lot of ground very quickly. The next technique I consider are control frameworks, especially when I'm auditing a healthy area. Sometimes controls are built like patches in an ocean. An organization suffers an incident, they build controls on that patch, and then they ask us to do an audit on that area. And of course, everything is going to be healthy. However, controls need to be built in a systemic manner. There are ABA guidelines, again, on internal governance, specifically mention the internal control framework should cover the whole organization. So if there are patches of controls, even if the area I'm auditing is healthy, I would still reword or focus my recommendations towards control frameworks to make sure that the control frameworks are built in a systematic manner. And the final point is process maturity. Audit has process assessment models, PAM, that if you can reword your recommendations, redesign your recommendations, or even your audit plans, and focus your work to push for more mature processes, then your audit work will persist more over time, especially when an auditor moves out and the organization then carries on with a more mature process. Now that brings me to the end of my slot. And before wrapping this up, I will just share a question that I ask myself all the time. And whenever we find a missing control or a failing control, and I have the reaction to fix the immediate risk, I always ask myself that question in red. How could have management prevented this control from failing or from having this missing control without an audit taking place? How could have management prevented this without an audit taking place? And then I use the three components, the three techniques mentioned there, the Audit components, the process maturity models, and control frameworks, so that I can answer that question. And I can then make my recommendations such that they will persist more over time. I'm pushing upwards in the diagram we shared. There are some references I have shared, and I will now bring this to a close. We'll have a Q&A session, how to move away from resist our reactions to addressing the immediate risk, but move away from that and try to push upwards within the organization and in the diagram I've shown you, so that we can look at enhancing the organizational capability and looking at the necessary mechanisms to keep the missing controls or the controls from failing in the first place, so that our efforts persist more over time. I will now hand over back to you, and thank you very much for this session.